Welcome to the Aro Benaiah Show. Today I'm joined by Rich Ashton, actor, a serial entrepreneur, author, and leadership developer with over 45 years of real-world small business experience, which has owned, grown, and turned around and exhibit multiple business. And along the way, he discovered something powerful: the value of growing leaders from within. He is the author of Growing Your Own, a practical guide to developing leaders inside small business. And today he's here to share the lessons he has earned and the theory. It's really a pleasure having you on the show, Rich.
I've been looking forward to it all day.
Yeah, thank you. So, Rich, what was it like growing up?
I grew up with a very strong, smart father who was a frustrated entrepreneur. He was a school administrator, but on the side, he always had something going. So I think that's probably where I got my entrepreneurial skills. I grew up in the Seattle area, and when it was time to go to college, I really wasn't ready to be in college. So I dropped out after 2 years. At that time, the Vietnam War was going, and so I had to enlist in the Navy to avoid being drafted. And so I served in the Navy, and that brought me to Texas, and I've been in Texas ever since.
Wow, that was really amazing. Despite you with your dad and you see your dad more like doing entrepreneurship, despite he couldn't get it right, what actually draws you into entrepreneurship? Did you actually see yourself from the head start that you're going to be an entrepreneur? Or was it something that come later that got to develop across the way while you're in the military?
I had a sense pretty early that I was not going to be satisfied unless I owned my own business. But I started my career after getting out of the Navy. I started my career with a fabulous company by the name of Trammell Crow. It was a large real estate development company, and because I had dropped out of college, I needed a break. And it was hard to get employment, but I kind of came in through the back door with that company. It was filled with not only MBAs, but primarily Ivy League MBAs. And so I was around incredibly smart people, and it filled in that educational gap for me. I learned on the job rather than learning in school. But it was a huge break for me to get to start my career with that company. And it was a pretty entrepreneurial company, but I decided that the real estate business was not where my passion lay. And so after a while, I sold my interest back to them and went out to find my next business venture. And I found several of them along the way.
Wow, amazing. So looking back, what earlier experience most influenced your leadership style today?
I have two answers to that question. My dad influenced my leadership style, my early leadership style, but my dad's style was very authoritarian, very dictatorial. And although I had early success, I started running into problems around the age of 40, and I realized that people were not responding to me as well as I needed them to. So I looked around, and I had several successful friends who were doing very well, and I studied their style and did some reading, and I was able to change my style to a much more, I wouldn't say collaborative, but I became a much better listener and a much less authoritarian leader at that time. And so those two things influenced it, one in the wrong direction, one in the right direction.
Yeah, amazing. I think this is really lovely. The fact that looking at your dad, you learned some things you could do better and some things you shouldn't do. And from your friends too, you could actually more like you were able to modulate some lessons from them and also across books to actually more like better your leadership style. And that's pretty amazing. So over 45 years, you have owned and operated different businesses. Which was the most challenging and why?
Well, they've all been challenging in their own way. I've had failures, so those were the biggest challenges, I guess. The HVAC company that I continue to own today, I bought when it was about to be put into bankruptcy, and I knew it was in serious trouble, but I didn't do a good job of analyzing it. I thought I could turn it around in 2 years, and it took 5 years for me to turn that company around. I still own it today, so it's been a good long-term experience, but I went from thinking I was pretty doggone smart to thinking I may be the stupidest person on the planet.
Wow, wow, wow. I think it's the fact that entrepreneurship has a whole lot of its own demand, and you just make reference to having projection of 2 years, and it later leads to kind of 5 years before you're able to turn it around. And I think that really speaks a whole lot on leadership. So, at what point do you realize that leadership is not just hard work? Leadership is not just hard work, but it was more like a bottleneck in a small business. When did you get to realize this?
I'm not sure there was a specific point, but I faced the issue along the way of trying to make a decision to when leaders needed to be added to the organization. Do I go outside and bring in somebody who is not familiar with our entrepreneurial culture, or do I promote somebody from within? The problem with promoting from within is nobody was prepared to lead. So along the way, I learned that if I was going to get our people ready, it was up to me. And that's when I really began to look for outside leadership information, books, etc., that applied to small business and would give me a framework to be able to teach our employees how to lead. Unfortunately, there isn't much of that information available to small business people. It's for big organizations, and it's all fine, but leading in a small organization is completely different than leading in a big organization.
Yeah, yeah, so true. That's so true. Amazing. All right. So you have actually more like talk about the frustration of hiring outside leaders, hiring more like outside leaders versus promoting from within. What kept going wrong?
Well, the outside people that I brought in had not experienced the chaos of small business, number one. And so if you are coming from a larger organization and things are pretty buttoned up and they run pretty smoothly, in a large organization, you do one or two things and you do them well. In a small business, you do 8 or 10 things, and some of them you do well and some of them you don't. But it is a relatively chaotic existence when you only have 5 or 10 employees. So they would get frustrated with needing to do a lot more than they had ever done. And then on the other side, your existing employees kind of wonder, gosh, we've brought the company this far. Why not us? Why were we not promoted? And why is this stranger brought into our company who doesn't really understand who we are? And they don't respond well to that. We had problems with bringing in outside leadership. I didn't fail every time with it, but I failed more than I succeeded with it.
Wow. Well, I think there's a lot of amazing lessons to learn in delving that small business when it comes to leadership. It's easier to get it wrong, especially being the fact that there's not a whole lot of persons to really look at when it comes to leadership positions, and the fact that most of them might not get to position themselves owing to training and everything, and bringing in new persons entirely could change the tune of their perception towards their commitment to the small business. And I think this is a whole lot of things that every small business need to look at. So in your experience, what causes inexperienced leader to fail most often?
Arrogance. I think that we're going to do it my way. There's not a better way. And I'm the guy who started this company, and so I've got all the answers. I would say that's probably it. I'm not sure, but from my standpoint, it takes a certain amount of arrogance to start a company. And so it's not going to be unlikely that arrogance is not always going to work to the positive. I certainly have been guilty of that at times. I'd like to think I'm a lot less arrogant now than I was earlier in my career. I think you'd have to talk to people and find out if that's true or not. I think arrogance is the right answer to that question.
Wow, amazing, arrogance. And I think I was listening to the Founders Podcast the other time, and it just dawned on me that almost every single entrepreneurs, when they actually started out, it was owing to their arrogance. They get to pull out from what they do and go all ahead and do what they get to do. And same arrogance most times is what sets them back. And I think learning how to kind of managing this arrogance is very, very key when it comes to small business and bigger business, when it comes to entrepreneurship in general, being that the things that get us so far could be the things that actually more like set us back a bit if it is not being managed right, and if we didn't get to kind of want to learn from others, which is very, very key. So what common mistake do you see business owner make when they promote good workers into leadership role?
Well, the biggest problem is that they're simply not ready. Just because they're a good employee doesn't make them a leader. In fact, just because you own a business doesn't make you a leader. It makes you a business owner. there's so little time to step back and build your organization. You're always marketing or putting out fires or paying bills or doing those things. And so the idea that you would be able to take time and train a leadership team so that someone is ready when you need them, that's just not reality in small businesses. So you promote a great employee into a role that they know nothing about. They do their best to become the operations manager, whatever it is. You get frustrated that they're not doing a better job. They get frustrated that people aren't responding to them and things aren't going well. And ultimately, you run the risk of losing your best employee because they just get frustrated with the situation. So if a leader could have a tool which they could hand or present that employee with, that would be a reference guide for everything that a new leader needs to know, every situation that they're going to run into. And they could pull out that reference guide and read through it real quickly and say, this is what I need to do in this situation. This is why that situation went badly.
Yeah, wow.
And guess,
Amazing.
guess what? I wrote that tool. So that is the nature of the book, Growing Your Own. That's
Oh, wow.
that's how it came to be.
Amazing. Growing your own. I think this really speaks volume. The fact that I think now we have made reference of not just assigning any persons into leadership, but now you have more like a tools that get to mentor them step to step when they get confused or when they don't know the next step to take. The book serves as more like a reference where they get to kind of draw from and actually more like better their arts. And I think this is very lovely. Lovely style of leadership or style for our business owner. Yeah, thank you, Rich. So, what traits consistently show up in people who grow into strong leaders over time?
There are several traits that are common to strong leaders. We teach accountability first. There is a book called Extreme Ownership, written by a couple of Navy SEALs, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the best book on leadership ever written.
Mm-hmm.
It starts out with a leadership principle. It illustrates that principle in combat. And then those two SEALs now run a leadership consulting business. And then it talks about how they applied it with one of their customers in the consulting business. It's very straightforward and it's excellent. And it starts out with accountability. So in the military, accountability means if you don't do your job, someone might get killed. And they take that very seriously. So it's an entirely different level of accountability than we have in business. We're not worried about people dying. We're worrying about, making money and growing and doing things like that. But they point out in that book that the leader is ultimately responsible for everything that happens on his watch. And even though in my case, so if a service technician goes out and makes a mistake on a service call, well, it was the service technician, but it was the service manager's mistake for not training him better. It was my mistake for not making sure that training was good. So accountability goes all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. And it's an important part of leadership is to understand that ultimately you're responsible for everything that happens. The second I would say is proactivity. The most common problem with leaders is leading out of fear. And if you're afraid to make a decision, it paralyzes you. And so you don't wind up being a proactive leader, you wind up being a reactive leader. And instead of you making things happen, stuff happens to you. And it's very frustrating to be in that role. But I've found that leaders who start from a position of fear never become very good leaders.
Yeah.
Another one is what I call intellectual curiosity. And I would say this is the missing ingredient in most small businesses, whether it's leaders or owners. And that is you're curious about what it is you do on a daily basis. And maybe you listen to podcasts about that. Maybe you want to become a better technician. But intellectual curiosity takes you beyond that. And it says, what else do I need to know? What do I not know? And what do I want to find out about? So one of my first bosses in business was a really bright guy. He was a Harvard MBA at 23. He was just incredibly smart, but he was incredibly hardworking. And he pulled me aside early on and said, Rich, you don't really know very much about business, do you? And I said, I've never been in business before. Of course I don't know. He said, I want you to start a reading program. And at that time, we had printed magazines, it wasn't online. And so he said, I want you to read 5 business periodicals every week, and I want you to read the Wall Street Journal. And I started doing that I guess I was in my 20s at that time, and I continue it to this day. And I read on a variety of subjects. I read only nonfiction. I read some business, but I read things about longevity and philanthropy and wellness, and some of it is leadership. And it has made me so much smarter across a lot of lines. And if you're going to be a leader, your ultimate responsibility is to influence people. The more you know about how other people think, and the more you know about just stuff, the more likely you are to be able to have a conversation which is influential. And I'm so grateful that I got started with that early. But I preach it to everybody that I mentor and teach. Develop intellectual curiosity. You'd be shocked at what you'll learn.
This is really amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for the ground rule. I think when you make reference uh, of proactivity, the intellectual curiosity, and the fact that too that everything rise and fall leaders, which simply means they knowing what to do and taking actions very fast, not allowing things happening to them, but them being proactive and yeah, being in the leading role as a leader, this really speak volumes of those leaders who lead better compared to those who doesn't. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So, for young trade people listening, what leadership habits should they start building early?
The first thing is to understand that accountability piece. I think that's one of the shocks for young leaders is how much accountability really goes along with being a good leader. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is to do what I was just talking about, read information. And I said earlier that it's difficult to find leadership information that applies to small business, but there is some out there. Ask questions. I'm a huge believer in learning from other people, and um, entrepreneurs tend to run in packs. So I have a lot of entrepreneurial friends, and some of the greatest advice I've gotten has been from my friends. And I ask a lot of questions, and I would encourage them to do that. If they can find a mentor who is, and most old guys like myself are flattered when somebody comes up and says, would you spend 30 minutes with me? Would you have lunch with me and let me ask you questions? I mean, that makes you feel 10 feet tall. So, who doesn't want to do that? And only if they don't have time is the only reason they wouldn't, I would think. But I've always been a good observer of life and of other people. And I can pick up leadership secrets from watching my grandson play baseball and watch how the coach interacts with the umpire and with the players. And all of those are little snippets of leadership that if you commit yourself to learning, it's a fun process. So that's right at the head of the list. Another one is to work on your communication. When you think of great leaders, they're all or almost all really good inspirational communicators. You don't have to be Martin Luther King to be an effective communicator, an effective leader. But leaders need to do what they say, they need to walk their talk, and they need to be 100% transparent, vulnerable, and honest. I was lucky to get a heavy dose of integrity from my dad and from my first employer. And I've been so grateful. So every company I've led has been led from a position of integrity and honesty. And that's the way I was trained. It's the way I was brought up. It's the only way I know how to do it. And I encourage young leaders to establish their values and stick with them and learn to communicate them.
Thank you so much, Ernest. I think this is a whole lot of blueprint that every young person who's looking for entrepreneurs could actually adopt. Yeah, this is really a whole lot. Thanks a whole lot. Being transparent, be vulnerable, mastering communication. Yeah, seek mentorship, and I think the roles of mentorship cannot be overemphasized, especially when you make reference of why you were in your 20s. You were able to kind of while you were working, you were able to come in contact with someone who actually advise you to actually more like read about Wall Street and get to pay attention to it. And over that has improved your communications, better your leadership skill, and a whole lot, which just speak volumes the role of a mentor can never be overemphasized. That's every young entrepreneur should look forward to. Yeah, just just ask. Sometimes it can be so dicey that we have this, we like say mental masturbation, hoping that nobody is going to answer us, but just working out and just ask could be more like the next miracle that we never expected. Just ask. Yeah, thank you, Rich.
You know, I didn't mention that in my reading, I intentionally read things that are written from a different point of view than I come from. So I am a social and fiscal conservative, and I make it a point to read things from the other side of the aisle, not because they will necessarily influence me, although they certainly enlighten me, but I want to know how everybody thinks. I don't want to argue with you. I want to talk to you. Tell me why you believe that. We can disagree and we can still be friends. And in today, in today's society, that's kind of a lost concept, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so true. But I think it's just the way you said. It's very key that every leaders learn how to more like be disagreeable but still be friends. Being that you're able to understand the other person's perspective and yeah, know why they think what they think, and you don't have to you don't have to chop their head off, but you just have to understand them. I get to move on to the next point, and it's really amazing. So why do you believe small business struggle more with leadership than larger organizations?
Well, two things, and I've mentioned both of them. One, there's not much information available, but the bigger problem is
Hmm.
that you just don't have time. You're moving in too many directions too quickly, that training the next layer of leaders is way down on the priority list. I could do it in our business because I had already begun to step away and the organization became large enough that I just said the only way I'm ever going to be able to retire if, and I didn't want to sell the business. The only way I'm going to retire is if I train these people to be able to run it in my absence. And it's a great source of pleasure that that's exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah, wow. Amazing is the fact that there is no much information you know, compared to more like bigger organizations where they have a lot of blueprints for every rules, for every leadership rules, for every a small business does not have most of those things. Once you have been assigned sometimes it can be so clumsy that a whole lot of persons who are in leadership role does not know what it entails, and this just speaks volumes to it. Yeah, thank you.
So
So
let me just jump in a second. I want to tell you how the book came to be because I didn't sit down to write a book.
okay.
When we started the leadership training course, it was going okay, but I knew there was a missing piece. And I began writing a blog to the people on the leadership team every 2 weeks. And it would be about something in leadership, something in management that was applicable to what we were going through in the company at the time. And they liked it and it was fine. But my goal in writing that was I wanted them talking amongst themselves about these leadership and management issues. Well, that didn't happen initially. And the general manager suggested to me that we should force them to talk about the blogs in management meetings. And so he carved out a block of time in every leadership meeting to talk solely about the blog that I had written during that 2 week period. And a really interesting thing happened. The first is they began to hold each other accountable to what was in the blog. Because they had talked about it openly, then when somebody stepped out of line with one of those leadership principles, one of the other parts of the leadership team would say, wait a minute, I think Rich wrote about that last week. And they would read through the blog and say, oh, there's the answer. And the other thing is they began printing out the blogs and accumulating them in binders on their desks. And I would see these white binders on the desks around the company. I said, what are these things? Said, well, that's where your blogs are. And they were using them as kind of a desktop reference. Well, that was kind of cool. I liked that. That made me feel good. So I wrote those blogs for a little bit over 2 years. And at the end of that period, I said, I've written about everything I know on this subject. It's now time for me to step back and to watch you put these principles into play. And one weekend, when nothing was going on, I pulled out the blogs and I read through all 50, there were 52 of them, I think. I read through all 52 of them. And I said, you know what? This is pretty good stuff. And I'm going to make a book out of it. And so I condensed it to 35 blogs. And so the blogs were already written. All I did was compile them into a book and published it. And it is now the desktop reference that all of our people use for for leadership principles. Somebody told me the other day, it's not a book to really sit down and read start to finish. And I said, well, it really wasn't designed to be. It was designed to be a guide. It was designed to be something you come back over and over and over again. So it's an easy read. It's 126 pages. The chapters are about 2.5 pages long. So it's a whole bunch of little snippets that will benefit particularly people who have not been formally trained in leadership. I like it in our blue collar company. I like it for your audience in that they probably haven't had a whole lot of leadership training or exposure to leadership training. This is a great thing for them to pick up and start reading, and they'll be surprised at how far it moves them toward becoming a skilled leader.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Thanks a whole lot for that, Richie. This really come timely. And I think it is the fact that you have walked through the routes and you have seen a whole lot of things and a whole lot of lacking. Yeah, thank you so much.
One of the reviewers, this is the best review that I got, said that every chapter was like sitting with a mentor who wants you to succeed. And I thought, well, that's exactly what I was going for. I really like that.
Wow, amazing. Thank you, Richie. So if we are starting over today, what leadership lessons will you apply sooner?
I was not as good a connector with people early on in my career. I had lots of acquaintances, not so many friends, and particularly inside a business environment, I was careful not to go too deep. But it gets back to the issue of influence. And if I want to influence you, if I know about you as a person, if I know what makes you tick, if I know what's important, if I knew about your family, if I knew about your upbringing, I would be so much more influential in your life, or I could be so much more influential if you would let me in. And so I find that building deeper connections with employees is the start of leading them. Not everyone will let you in. And sometimes it takes a while. We have a lady in our company who has become a kind of a frontline leader. It took a year for me to break through with her. And she just didn't trust that the owner of the company was really interested in her. And I just kind of kept coming back and kind of nipping at her heels a little bit. And we finally connected over something that her son had done. And and her world opened up. And so now we have a great relationship. But I like to establish a different relationship with every person in my life, whether they're in the company or outside the company. I want to connect with you on something that is important to you. And I want to connect with the next person on something that's important to them. And you get that again by asking a lot of questions.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thanks a whole lot, Richie. Thanks for sharing. So what does success look like for you now after everything you have built and handed over?
Success looks like what I'm doing right now, this being on a podcast, speaking to groups, talking about the book, talking about leadership. I have just retired officially, so I'm new at this, but I'm going to spend the next 6 months working on marketing the book and marketing the training course that goes along with it. And if that's successful, then I'd like to continue doing that. If not, I've got 2 boys that are grown and they're in the construction business, and I've still got some real estate background. We probably do a little real estate together. I've got grandkids and I get to spend as much time as I want with the grandkids. And so those are all the things that define success for me.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Richie. So, Richie, how can my audience connect with you, those who are looking forward to connect with you? How can they get your book, which is Growing Your Own? How can they get your book, and where is the best platform to do this?
The website is growingyourown.net. They're welcome to communicate with me by email, rich@growingyourown.net. And the book, again, is Growing Your Own. But the website will tell you how to get the book. It'll tell you everything about it. And it's about to come out in audio form. It is not, as we're taping this, it's not available, but it will be within a couple of weeks, I believe, too.
Ooh, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Richie. Yeah, it's really been amazing having this particular conversation with you. So what is going to be your final words to our audience before we go?
If you haven't thought about being a leader, investigate it. It may not be for you. It isn't for everybody. But particularly if you're in one of the blue-collar trades, you probably haven't seen much about leadership. From a self-serving standpoint, I'd say start with the book. Allow yourself to consider that for yourself and consider what it means. If you're capable of being a leader, I can assure you it's a really gratifying existence.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, Rich, thank you for sharing your decades of wisdom and practical leadership lessons that small business owner and trade people can actually apply. Your work remind us that strong business are built by strong people, and strong people are developed, not found. For those listening, you can learn more about Rich work and his book Grow Your Own at growyourown.com. Yeah, thank you for tuning into the Aro Benaiah Show. If this episode challenged you on how to think about leadership, share it with someone who is growing a team or becoming a leader themselves. I'll see you in the next episode, and it's really, really a pleasure having you on the show,
Thank you
Rich.
so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Rich.